दोनों संकलन में कौन सा सही जन्म है?
हैं? ये
गोबर नहीं है तो पता है कि
हाँ गोबर दिमाग है।
हाँ गोबर दिमाग कुछ नहीं कर पाए जीवन में तो ये
Hare Krishna. Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Let's see, अभी तक महाराज को कोई कम्युनिकेशन आया नहीं है सामने से. I'm just waiting. क्योंकि मेरी पहली सारी कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंस महाराज से हुई है. I'm just waiting for him to come.
हरे कृष्ण जी।
Hare Krishna. I'm audible, right? I'm a
Yes,
Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhuji.
I'm just waiting for Maharaj. सब लोग बच. In the meantime, what am I supposed to do? Entertain you guys? Hare Krishna, जी अम्मा जी. I'm just मैं वही पूछ रहा हूँ कि इस दौरान मैं क्या करूँ? Should I indulge you, entertain you? Subscribe.
Anyways, by the mercy of Krishna, we are gonna get your association for rest
I'm
of
not
chapter.
association. I'm just bidding time. I'm just bidding time. मैं महाराज का इंतजार कर रहा हूँ कब महाराज आएंगे. But in the meantime, maybe I can call him. कॉल करके देखता हूँ अगर, क्योंकि ऐसे कब तक बैठे रहेंगे. कहीं ये ना हो कि और आधा घंटा ऊपर होना तो नहीं चाहिए. आधा घंटा महाराज ने बोला ही नहीं था. Eastern time महाराज said the same thing. एक सेकंड. महाराज ने मुझे कंफर्म किया था टाइम. 1 मिनट. Mail did you letter sent? मेरे मेल में. It's the last one. महाराज का 8 PM होगा ना. अगर ये महाराज का 8 PM है, कैलिफोर्निया, राइट? वेट, एक बार टाइम चेक कर लेता हूँ वहाँ का. ये कैलिफोर्निया तो 8 बज गए हैं. Yeah, this is the time he should be there. I'm calling him. Let me see. Maharaj is declining the call. Maybe he is on his way. He's declining my call. मेरे पास और कोई नंबर भी नहीं है. महाराज का डायरेक्ट नंबर ही है. I don't have anybody else. कोई secretary, nothing like that. So wait.
You can drop a message to him.
Everything is done. What do you think I'm doing? आधे घंटे से बैठा हूँ पहले से लॉगिन होके.
I was thinking that if he is declining, he has the phone in hand.
हाँ हाँ मैंने मैसेज किया है वही. That's because it's like I did that and I'm just waiting. See, उनके हिसाब से तो मैंने आज ही बात करी ना उनसे, लास्ट कन्वर्सेशन. मेरे लिए ये है कि मैं बीच में 5 घंटा सो के उठा हूँ. बट लाइक फॉर हिम तो दिन चल रहा है. So I'm just thinking. हाँ देख लिया मैसेज. ब्लू टेक आ गया. Maybe should be coming anytime. Maybe in the meantime you feel that the need to be entertained. Then I can entertain you guys. Because होता है ना, जैसे मेन शो होने से पहले साइड शो होता है, फिर साइड शो के बाद देन they give rise to the main show, opening and closing for the main performance. Alright. Yeah, I received a call from Maharaj. Wait. This is the time, Maharaj. Mixed up? Did you mix it up? Okay, yes, Maharaj. Sure, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj. Yeah, Maharaj is coming. वही जैसे मुझे लगा था. He got things mixed up. Anyway, he's coming.
Whoops. There we go.
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna.
Maharaj. Please accept my humble Mrs. Maharaj. This is Bimla Prasad Das, your servant. And we are very, very fortunate to have His Holiness Hridayananda Goswami Maharaj amongst us. And Maharaj is gonna enlighten us in Bhagavatam. And before Maharaj starts, I mean, Maharaj is a living legend, just to say the least. So, yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, here we have somebody who finished what Prabhupada started. Prabhupada started it like Bhagavatam translations and like came on with 10th canto, and then from 10th canto onward, the remaining part of the 10th canto, which is the bulk of it, to the remaining cantos of Bhagavatam, which we study now as part of Bhakti Vedanta. And these are Bhakti Vaibhava students. So Maharaj,
Vaibhava students. By the way, are you recording?
Rukmini, yeah, we are recording Maharaj, and we are also going YouTube live.
Oh, very good.
Both.
Very good.
So,
So sorry to
yeah,
interrupt you. Please go ahead.
no, that's what it is. And of course, Maharaj is speaking to us in English, but he is fluent in 7 languages. Okay, try something else with Maharaj: Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, German, and don't dare to dare to talk to him in Sanskrit. He's super expert with that.
Yeah,
And
malicious.
Maharaj has got at least half a dozen books, apart from the BBT translations, completing the project of Prabhupada. You can have Maharaj's Comprehensive Guide to Bhagavad Gita. It's a very critical edition. I've seen that. It's just like as you can find a book on the same league that is published by Oxford or Cambridge. Maharaj himself is by the way, Maharaj himself is a PhD in Sanskrit studies from Harvard University. So the most interesting part is what Maharaj is pursuing, that is pioneering that is Krishna West, kind of a revival of Hare Krishna preaching in the West, as it should be actually. So initially there was quite some opposition, but now gradually people are getting used to it. So ultimately, yes, as I have learned from some of my seniors in ISKCON, is that it is easier to start a thing than get a permission for that thing. So you start a thing and ultimately you get a permission for that. So Maharaj is highly successful with Krishna West, and we all pray that it comes back to the same, at least to the same level Prabhupada left and Prabhupada wanted it to be. So over to you, Maharaj. Please, we are all ears. Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see all of you. I don't get a chance to travel as much as I used to. And so when I get the opportunity to see all these nice young devotees in different parts of the world, it's a real pleasure for me. So I believe we're speaking about those chapters of the Puranjana story.
Yes, Maharaj.
I actually, for a couple of years, I studied that story because I was thinking of doing like a novel about it. But so let's start with the word Puranjana. Pura, of course, means city. And Jana means a person. And so Puranjana literally means the person in the city. Puranjana. And this is an allegory told by Narada Muni to King, literally his name is Prachina Barisha, which means Eastern grass. And, you know, so why is he called King Eastern Grass? That's actually his name, you know, Prachina Bharti, because it's actually, I mean, the Bhagavatam is full of humor. Sometimes devotees think, oh, it's Sanskrit, it must be very serious. But actually, there's a lot of humor in Shastra. Just to give one example, an animal, a land animal is called murga, which means it goes on the land. Or a bird is called kaga because it goes in the sky. And a tree is called a naga, a no-go, because it doesn't go anywhere. So it's called a no-go, a naga. And another funny thing in Sanskrit is the word dvija. It means a Brahman, it means teeth, and it means a bird. And the reason is because just like a Brahman is twice born, dvija, so your teeth come in twice. So therefore, dvija, twice born, also refers to the teeth. And bird, first the egg comes out, then the egg hatches. So it's, I mean, it's quite a sense of humor. So the same word means a Brahman, teeth, and a bird. But anyway, so getting back to King Eastern Grass, the reason he's called King Eastern Grass, Prachina Bharti, is because he was immersed in karma kanda, and in the worst kind of karma kanda, he was hunting for animals. And of course, the pretext for this hunting was that he was going to offer sacrifice. It's very interesting what you can see here, not only in the case of King Eastern, so King Eastern Grass, because when you do these Vedic sacrifices, and of course he was doing animal sacrifices, then you have to lay down the kusha mat, which Krishna describes in the Gita, which is also called varhi. And so the tips, it's sort of like pampa grass, it's called in English. And so it's a very long grass that has these sort of spear type ending, which has to face east. So eastern grass, eastward grass. And so because he was doing so many animal sacrifices, Narada, he sarcastically called King Eastern Grass. So anyway, just a word about Vedic philosophy of law. There's a principle in modern criminology, a well-known principle called zero tolerance. And the reason this term is used is because criminological studies, social science studies showed that there was a policing strategy in America which ultimately was a very bad idea. And that is, for example, with drugs, illegal drugs, they thought, well, we won't bother going after the simple users, you know, the average people who just buy some drugs. We'll go after the big pushers. Or, for example, in a low-class neighborhood, we won't worry about petty crimes, but we'll go after the big crimes. But what they find is that if in a society certain laws are ignored, even if they're small things, it leads to bigger criminality because it creates a general atmosphere of lawlessness. And so therefore they developed the philosophy, the policing philosophy of zero tolerance, where if you can't have it, like if there's broken windows or people crossing the street against the red light, that will lead to bigger crimes. So they were actually aware of this in Vedic culture. And therefore there was a principle not to make a law which people won't follow. And so in any society, there is what is certain things are left to good customs. For example, it's not against the law, let's say in India, to walk down the street of a city and just make faces at people. You know, it can be very rude. It's very rude, but it's not illegal. And so if you say, okay, it should be illegal to make funny faces at people on the sidewalk, that becomes a little silly, because how are you going to enforce that? You'd have to have a surveillance state like in China, I guess. So therefore, now one very important example where the Brahmins realize that it is not wise to pass laws or establish dharma laws that people won't follow, especially if the people not following the law are the kings. Because as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Jajadacharti Sheshtas, whatever the Sheshta, whatever the most important person does, Tat Tadivetara, the Itara Jana. Itara is a very interesting word in Sanskrit. It means the opposite of whatever came before. It's like this and its opposite. So the opposite of Shrestha is Itara Jana, which means the ordinary people, the people who are not Shrestha. But anyway, so I'll give you two examples of kings, because if you have someone that actually is willing to go into battle and maybe get his arm cut off or his leg cut off or his head cut off, and he has to kill other people, I mean, it takes a certain kind of person. I mean, personally, I would not feel very inclined to go and cut people's arms and heads off or have them cut off my arms and head. It's not my natural propensity. So if you have someone like that, it's going to be a very passionate person. And therefore, the two activities which are discouraged indirectly, but not legally in the Shastra are animal killing and polygamy. To give an obvious linguistic proof that even though kings were allowed to marry several wives, but it was actually discouraged in the Shastra. First of all, an obvious linguistic proof is that the word for co-wife, the way you say co-wife in Sanskrit is sapatni. Sa is translated as with, but it means like, that's also what you said, co-wife, sapatni. And so from this word sapatni, you have the word sapatna, which means enemy. Enemy. So I mean, connect. There's only like 3 dots here you have to connect. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna said to Krishna, I am not willing to fight even for an asapatnam ridhang rajam, even for a kingdom which is asapatnam, without any enemies, without any rivals. And so what we find is that famous kings keep ruining their lives by polygamy. For example, Dasharatha. Dasharatha basically lost his life. He basically died because he had more than one wife. Kaikeyi, that whole thing with, we have to get rid of Ram, my son has to be the king. And then Ram was sent away, and Dasarath died of grief. So, and another example of that is, my God, I was thinking that, of course, the famous example, Pandu. I mean, Pandu died because he was trying to have an intimate connection with the co-wife. And king, what's his name? Chitraketu. Think in the 8th canto, 8th or 9th canto, where he had like, a million wives or something, obviously very interesting individual. But then he finally had a son, and then the co-wives became jealous of the wife that had the son, and they killed the baby. So you have all these examples where kings that have a lot of wives, a lot of times it's disastrous. So it's sort of an extra legal discouragement for polygamy. And of course, another thing which is strongly discouraged, but not directly, is hunting. Dasarath, again, lost his life because of a hunting accident. He lost his life because of a hunting accident because he was cursed that when he killed the Brahmin that he would die. Parikshit lost his life because of a hunting accident. Pandu lost his life because these are top tier Rajarshis. These are not, there was some king, in India a long time ago. No, these are the top tier kings. Dasharatha, Pandu, the great Pandu, who appears in Chaitanya Leela, of course, as Bhavananda Roy, the father of Ramananda Roy. Parikshit. So polygamy, hunting is a disaster, and so on. So so again, you have Narada approaching King Eastward Grass. Again, it's a sarcastic name because he's like out of control doing animal sacrifices. And so, and then Narada shows him all these animals are going to come back and kill you. That's a strong discouragement. If you're a king and you're reading the Bhagavatam, you're going to think, maybe I don't really want all these savage beasts coming back and tearing me into pieces. So, maybe we'll go vegan tonight. So anyway, so that's sort of the background of the Puranjana story. And then the name Puranjana is based on a very ancient Vedic metaphor. And that is, which you find, and that is which you find in the Bhagavatam a lot, and that is that the body is compared to a rata, which you can translate, car or chariot. I hope they had carriages. What do you do if you're in your chariot and it rains? So, I hope for their sake they had carriages back then also. But anyway, so they so Puranjana, that Sharira Ratam, the body is like the chariot, and the horses are the senses. Just like the senses pull us to different places. So the horses or the senses, they're pulling the chariot of the body. The reins, which are supposed to control the horses, are the mind. The chariot driver is the intelligence, buddhi, which is supposed to control the reins. In other words, intelligence should control the mind. And ultimately, the soul is the passenger that's supposed to give directions to the chariot driver. So the whole story is set up. The whole structure of this Puranjana story, number one, is to show that ultimately hunting is a disaster, and that bodily attachment is a disaster, and so that's how the story is set up. And then Puranjana. Now, another thing I want to mention that's very important. This story, in chapter 28. Chapter 28, verses 53 and 55, they're two of the most important verses in the Bhagavatam, because some people who clearly have a lot too much time on their hands, argue like, does the soul fall from Vaikuntha and this and that. I don't know if that nonsense has come to India. I guess it has. How could it not? There's always a market all around the world for nonsense. But actually, twice in that story, and that's another very important point, because at the end, Puranjana, of course, an allegory. This is directly an allegory. In fact, in chapter 29, Narada Muni actually explains all the symbolism. It's a symbolic story, which means that everything in the Bhagavatam is not literally history. And in chapter 29 of the fourth canto, Narada explains like all the symbolism. This stands for this, that stands for that. But at the dramatic end of the story, and I'd like to just read a few of those verses to you, which are, first I'll go to 4:28:53. My memory serves. See, I joined the Hare Krishna movement and develop a sharp memory. So Narada Muni, Puranjana basically actually, there's a very clever thing that when I just have to mention this also, when Narada Muni starts to narrate the story, where he kind of directly tells Puranjana, this story is really about you. Let's see if I can find that particular verse. It doesn't come out in the English. You have to know Sanskrit. Okay, I know what I want to do now. So it's so first he comes and chastises him for killing so many animals. And so if you look at, do you have books there? If you look at
Yes, Maharaj,
What's that?
we can post it like on the screen.
Okay, 4:25:10.
Yes, Maharaj.
So let me know when you can all see that.
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay, this is where Narada Muni, if you look at the Sanskrit, you don't get this in English. But if you look at the Sanskrit, he's really telling him that this story is about you. Because the Sanskrit is Asit, which means there was. Asit Puranjano Nama. There was named Puranjana, Raja, a king, Rajano king. So if you look at, in the Bhagavatam, these things are actually intentional. It's not like, oh, what a happy coincidence. If you look at the second line here, it says Raja Rajan, a king. And so this is where Narada is sort of indirect, because the king was very proud, indirectly telling him, this is really a story about you. There was, O Puranjana, named king, O king, Brihatshrava, which means great fame, greatly heard about, literally, Brihatshrava. Tasya Vigyata Nama Asit, and he had, Tasya means of him. It's in English, we would say he had Sakha, the last line, a friend, Nama, who was named Avigyata, unknown or forgotten. It's a very powerful story. I read this story actually when the book first came out, hot off the press. We were in Mayapur when this book actually came out around 1976 or something. And I remember I just grabbed it because I was one of the minority, I guess, of Prabhupada disciples who actually read his books. So anyway, so I grabbed this book and I was in Calcutta, as we often were waiting. I was waiting for my flight, to go back to the West. And so I just spent the day in front of those beautiful deities in Calcutta, reading this story to the deities. And that was around 1976. And so Narada said, Tasya, of him there was, in other words, Asit, Nama Asit. In other words, of him there was. That's how you say he had in Sanskrit. So Sakha, a friend who is named the forgotten one. A friend named forgotten. It's a very powerful story if you think about it, that he had a friend named forgotten because Abhigat the Cheshta, because that friend's activities were forgotten. And so really the heart of this story is the forgotten friend, the unknown friend, or the friend who's not understood, Abhigyata. And he's called that because his activities have been forgotten. And so Abhigyata in Sanskrit, of course, it's just, Vijnana, Vigyata, which means understood deeply, or also forgotten, Abhigyata. So now let's go to 4:28:53 and keep in mind this thing about the forgotten friend. 4:28:53. 4:28:53.
Want me to come to that verse, Maharaj?
4:28:53.
Do you want me to come to that? Okay.
Yeah. Everyone has to look, because I want you to see the Sanskrit, because that's really where
Yes,
you
Maharaj.
find. 428.53. Okay, so the friend is avigyata, forgotten or unknown. Now, at the very end of the story, Puranjana, at the end, at the end of his life, he was thinking of his poor wife. Therefore, he took birth as a wife, and goes out with King Malya Dwaja, the queen, as a queen who marries Malya Dwaja. They take Vanaprastha. They go out to the forest, and she goes out to collect firewood or just forest food called Vanya. And when she comes back, her husband is sitting there in his yoga position, unmoving. She touches his feet, they're cold, and basically he's died, but he's just still sitting there. And so she begins to grieve and wail because she's, by this time an elderly lady. She's out in the forest and her husband is gone, and she just begins to grieve and wail. And so then a Brahmin comes, a young Brahmin comes, and as Narada explains, this is God. And now in Sanskrit, if you look at this verse, it begins with the word api. Api in Sanskrit, when it's the first word in a sentence, makes the sentence a question. In other contexts, for example, it can mean even or something like that, like it's even so, even if, like api chet suduracharo, even if. So api chet is the exception. Api chet means even, literally even if. However, when it begins a sentence otherwise, it makes a sentence a question. So this is a question. And the question is one of the most moving, poignant, powerful questions in all of our literature. It's God saying to the soul, api smarasi cha, do you remember me? Do you remember this? Because Narada will explain that this word atmanam, or atma, it's just an accusative. It's atmanam because it's the object of the verb smartasi. Do you remember? So, do you remember the Supreme Soul? Who is the avigyata sakam? Who is the forgotten friend? So it turns out the forgotten friend is God. And Sakhe is vocative, oh friend. So he says, do you remember the soul, the forgotten friend? Friend. So just like in the past, the story, it's like bookends with, in Hollywood, like where you sort of frame a story. So the story begins saying, Asit Puranjano Nama, there was a person named Puranjana, Raja Rajan, a king, O king. And so these two words were put together, a king, O king. And here again we say, a friend, O friend. And so there's extraordinary literary skill in the Bhagavatam, if you actually look. And so, now here's the point which is so important, because all these foolish debates about where does the soul come from, and here God himself tells us where we come from. Hitwa, in the third line, hitwa means rejecting. Simple Sanskrit verb. It doesn't mean, I don't know, fried potatoes. It means rejecting. That's all it means. And so, people shouldn't go crazy with their paroksha-vad, with their esoteric interpretations. Because if you just get out of control so that any word can esoterically mean anything, then the result is nothing means anything, or everything means nothing. Because if you just ignore what a word literally means, like for example, here it says, api smarasi cha atmanam, do you remember the soul? Narada Muni explains it means paramatma. So paramatma is an atma, but it's the supreme atma. And so therefore, if you say, okay, Narada's taking atma to be paramatma, it's not a big stretch. Because Vishnu is a soul, but he happens to be the supreme soul. But if you say hitwa means something else that has nothing to do with the verb, it's just nonsense. So what this word literally says is hitwa mam, rejecting me, padaman vichan, searching for a place, gataha, the last word, you went, Bhoma bhogarato. It's like desiring to enjoy or wanting to enjoy bhoma bhoga, which means literally material enjoyment. Bhoma, of course, in the word bhumi or bhu, which can also refer to the material world in general. And so bhoma means here earthly, material enjoyment. You went to a place which will turn out to be this material world because you wanted to enjoy sense gratification. And when you did that, you rejected me. That's what it says. For those who think we were never with Krishna, it's like they say, read it and weep. Hitwa mang. And they will say all kinds of nonsense like, well, this means we were within Mahavishnu. No, it doesn't. Because you don't reject Krishna and then go into his body. You don't look for sense gratification inside the body of Vishnu. So it's not rejecting me. So it's anyway rejecting me. And then if you go to verse 55, same thing, 4:28:55, just 2 verses down.
Maharaj, 4.
28:55.
Yes, Maharaj.
Here, we now have absolute confirmation because Krishna says satwam, which literally means he, you. That's how you say in Sanskrit, it is you who, or you are the one who. When you want to use, like you can say, you did this, but if you want to be more emphatic and say, it is you who did this, or you are the one who did this, this is how you do it in Sanskrit. Satwam. Vihaya, rejecting. This is the same verse, the same verb. In 53, we had the verb hitwa. Here we have the same verb with the root as ha, but with the prefix v. So it changes the way the indeclinable participle is made. Anyway, if you pay me a lot of money, I'll give you all the grammar rules. So satwang vihaya, that was a joke. I'm not a crazy guru. So satwang vihaya mang bandho. So bandho means, oh friend, you are the one who rejecting me. Gato, you went gramya matir with mundane consciousness, mahin to the material world. And vicharan, wandering about, padama drakshi, you saw a place. A drakshi is just imperfect past tense. You saw from the verb darsh, like darshanam. Adrakshi, you saw a place, kayachin nirmitang striya, which was nirmitam, constructed by a certain lady, who of course is Maya Devi. So Krishna twice says in this section that you rejected me and came to the material world. Now there's one purport of Prabhupada, I think in the 7th canto or 3rd canto, where, in fact, I'll give you the verse number right now real quick. Let's see. See, how does it go? Anyway, I'm not finding it right now. Oh, yeah, 7:135. I don't know if
Coming,
I can.
Maharaj.
What's that?
Coming, Maharaj.
Okay, coming right up. And give me some French fries with that. Yes.
7:134.
Yes. 7:1. Yeah, 7:135. There you go. There it is right there. You can click on that, 7:135.
Can you see it? Is it visible, Maharaj?
Yeah, 7:135. Yeah. But you need to click. Wait a second. 7:1. Let me see 36, because it gave me the wrong one in my looked it
See.
up. Yeah, just the next one. Let me see if it's the next one.
Yes,
I don't know.
Maharaj.
Oh no, go back to 34. Maybe it's 34. Yeah, that's it. So let's see that whole verse there.
Okay.
Okay, now the only time that Prabhupada says no one falls from Vaikuntha is in the context of this story. And so, as Prabhupada said, in the system of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, the main element is Shastra, obviously. Prabhupada is bona fide because he is faithfully presenting Shastra. It's not that Shastra is bona fide because Prabhupada likes it. And so, therefore, when Prabhupada's commenting on this story and says no one falls from Vaikuntha, he's commenting on this story. So you have to know what this story is, which no one does that quotes that. They don't bother finding out what the story is about. So it's the story where Jai and Vijay are cursed and fall out of Vaikuntha. So I'm going to read this verse in the Sanskrit and translate it very literally, and you'll see what it's actually about. Sri Yudhishthira Uvacha, steady in battle, Yudhishthira. So Sri Yudhishthira said, Kidrasha Kasyava Shapo, Hridasabi Marshana, Ashadheya Ivabhati, Harere Kantinang Baba. So this is what he says, that Kidrasha, what kind? Kidrasha Shapo, curse. What kind of curse? Kidrasha Shapa. What kind of curse? Kasyava Shapa. And whose curse? What kind of curse? And whose curse? Haridasa Abhimarshana could afflict, Abhimarshana could so severely afflict a Haridasa, a servant of Hari. And so what we're talking, and so in other words, so let me just finish it. Ashadheya. This means literally in Sanskrit, unbelievable. Shraddha means belief. Shraddheya means believable. Shraddheya. And ashraddheya means literally unbelievable. So Eva, abhati. Abhati means it appears. In other words, he's saying this seems unbelievable. That's literally what Yudhishthira is saying. It's very modern. It's like English. This seems unbelievable. Ashadheya ivavati. What seems unbelievable? Harer ekantinang bhavaha, that there could be bhava, material existence, for pure devotees of Hari. Because eka means one, anta means end or goal or purpose, anta, which we still have in English as the word end. So ekanti is someone who has only one purpose, one end. So harer, of Hari, ekantinam, that there could be bhava, material existence, for people who are pure devotees of the Lord. How can you be a pure devotee of Hari and you're just, having fun in Vaikuntha, and then someone comes and just throws you out like some usher or something? You get thrown out of the movie after you bought a ticket. You're just sitting there eating your popcorn. You get thrown out of the movie. So that's what this question is actually about. And so when Prabhupada says about this story, that no one falls from Vaikuntha, he's commenting on the point that Narada is going to make. The special circumstances under which Jai and Vijay had to leave Vaikuntha, because it was really just Krishna's pastime. Otherwise, no one can be kicked out of Vaikuntha. So I mentioned that because, the reason I mentioned that is because in the Puranjana story that we're reading, that's where Krishna, it's the only place in the Bhagavatam where Krishna, the boss, where Krishna directly talks about how the soul comes to the material world. Now contrast that Puranjana story where Krishna twice says, You wanted sense gratification. You rejected me. And in direct contrast is this story, which is in the 3rd and 7th cantos, where Jai and Vijay, they didn't reject Krishna. They don't want to come to the material world, but someone else came and threw them out by a curse. So these are completely different stories. So whenever we talk about a soul exercising free will, that's the 4th canto, that where Krishna twice says, you rejected me, you wanted to enjoy sense gratification. And the one time where it turns out that souls don't really fall, it's because they didn't want to, because they were Hari Ekanti, they wanted to serve Krishna. Jai and Vijay did not leave Vaikuntha because they wanted to enjoy the material world, but that's exactly what Krishna says about the souls that do choose to come here. So these stories are giving 2 completely different cases. And it's in the case where the soul does not want to leave Krishna that Prabhupada says the soul doesn't fall. In other words, souls that don't want to leave Vaikuntha do not leave Vaikuntha and are not kicked out of Vaikuntha by someone else. So anyway, occasionally, so I think it's important to understand what's really going on. Just one last point on this, frankly, I think this nonsense about, we were never with Krishna. Here's 2 other points, because I don't know if this, I explained this in Dallas, actually, in a class recently, but here's another one. You don't mind if I explain these things?
No, Maharaj, this is why we are here. Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay.
The
Just
board
want to
of-
make sure I get my, I get Mahaprashadam. So, okay, so if you can take that verse off the screen, and then I can just look at, we can go back to just looking at the devotees. There's another reason.
Maharaj,
What's
but
that?
I'm saying there are not many to look up at anyways, but anyways, Maharaj, it's okay. That's what it is.
So another point I wanted to make very quickly is why it's absurd to say that our spiritual body did not exist previously. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna places everything that exists in only 2 categories. And he does this in the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, where he says, Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sata. In other words, basically what Krishna says is there are 2 kinds of things, and that's all. There's no third kind of thing. He says one kind of thing did not exist in the past, exists now, and will not exist in the future. Like, for example, the building you're in right now. It didn't exist in the past, it exists now, and in the future it won't exist. And then Krishna says there are things that have always existed, exist now, and always will exist. Souls. In fact, so strict is Krishna, there are only these 2 kinds of things, that he includes himself in the same category as the jiva for this purpose. You know that verse where Krishna says, Natvevaham jatu nasam. Never did I not exist, nor you. We've always existed. Natvevaham jatu nasam, natwang neme janadipa, nor all these kings, nachaiva na bhavishama, nor is it the case that we will not exist. All of us, sarvevayam. So even when we're talking about the endurance of different categories of existence, Krishna puts himself in the same category as the jiva. And then he talks about matter. So if we have a spiritual body, or we will have a spiritual body, but it doesn't exist now, it only begins to exist later when we become liberated, the reason that's foolishness is that it would require a third kind of existence, which Krishna rejects in the Gita, namely something which did not exist in the past, and then begins to exist, and then will exist forever. There is no such thing. Go back to basics. Read the first verses of Krishna's teaching in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. There is no such thing as an object that didn't exist, comes to exist, and then will exist forever. There is no such thing. So anyway, I could go on and on. You have to put more coins in the meter. But so the Puranjana story is important for many reasons. Basically, what Narada does in most of the Puranjana story is that he takes this ancient Vedic analogy, which you find in the Gita. You find, well, certainly in the Bhagavatam, and that, you know, the chariot is the body, the horses are the senses, the reins are the reins are the mind, the chariot driver is the intelligence, the soul is the passenger, and he builds a whole story out of this, and actually combines this with another ancient Vedic metaphor, which is in the Gita, Navadware Pure Dehi, and I'll tell you now exactly where that is in the Bhagavad Gita. The city of 9 gates, because the city of 9 gates is actually in the Gita. Okay, it's verse 513. Can you put Bhagavad Gita 513 up there?
Sorry, Maharaj, 5:30?
Yeah, Bhagavad Gita 513.
Yes,
Because
Maharaj.
Because actually the whole Puranjana story is really built around this metaphor, which is in the Bhagavad Gita 513. And the whole Puranjana story is built on this metaphor.
Yeah, I'm just a second, Maharaj.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll say in the meantime. Okay, we got it. Okay, look at the last 2 lines. Navadware Pure, in the city of 9 gates. Obviously, the word dwar we have in English as the word door. So Navadware Pure, Dehi, the embodied soul in the city of 9 gates. And so the Puranjana, the guy in the city, it's in this city of 9 gates. So basically, Narada Muni took this ancient Vedic metaphor and just built a whole story out of it. A metaphorical story where a person actually goes into a city of 9 gates, which is, of course, his own human body. So, Navadware Pure Dehi Naiva Kurvan Nakaryan, not doing anything nor causing anyone to act. Okay, so that's all for that verse. So I think that's, I'll kind of wrap that up here. And I've just tried to point out some of the important features of the Puranjana story. It is a treatise against animal killing. It is a beautiful metaphor of Narada Muni, which actually creates a whole story based on an ancient Vedic metaphor, which is also in the Gita. It's a treatise, as I said, against animal killing. It also is the only place in all of our literature, in the Bhagavatam, which Jiva Goswami says the most important text. It's the only place in the Bhagavatam where we find out how the soul came to the material world. And Krishna twice says, you rejected me. And you came here because you wanted to enjoy. So we can take that screen off, that verse for now. And actually, I think the real silliness of this is that if they say, well, you know, once you know Krishna, you can never reject Krishna. But actually, that's just, as they say, philosophically kicking the can down the road. because imagine, for example, as some people say, well, we were in the Tatastha Shakti, which is kind of absurd because there is no place called Tatastha Shakti. It's not a place, it's an ontological category. So it's not, I mean, you can't come from a category, you have to come from a place. But anyway, let's say, for example, as some people say, you came out of Mahavishnu, or you came out of this non-place, which doesn't even exist. It's just a philosophical category, the Tatastha Shakti. But still, it is in terms of moral philosophy, how could we claim that Krishna is not responsible for our suffering, as he says in the Bhagavad Gita? Actually, you don't have to maybe get it up right now, but Krishna actually says, and I'll give you the verse number if you want to look it up later, 5:15, that I am not responsible for anyone's sin, nor for their good deed. So, in other words, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, this material world is dukkhalayam. It's a place of suffering. And so therefore, if you come to the material world, you will suffer. Now, if we didn't choose to come to this material world, then God would be responsible for our suffering, because I didn't want to be here. Krishna just put me here. So therefore, the only way we can be morally liable, the only way we can be responsible for our own suffering is if we chose it. If you choose something and it blows up in your face, well, you chose it. So that means if I chose to come to this world and I never knew Krishna, that's cheating. That would be cheating on God's part, because he didn't show me the whole menu. How could I be responsible for choosing the material world if I didn't know there were other options? And so therefore, even if I was never with Krishna, I would still have to know Krishna in order for me to be morally responsible for choosing to come to this world. And so therefore, it doesn't solve the problem. You cannot say we came to this world and never knew Krishna, because then it's not our fault we chose this world, because we didn't know there were other choices. So some people, I guess, very nobly dedicate their lives to terrible philosophy. So, I mean, you have to give them credit for coming up with some really bad philosophy. So therefore, there's no way in the world you can be morally responsible for being in the miserable material world unless you chose it and you knew what the other choices were. So anyway, you, I don't know, slice the pakora. Prabhupada made as the whole motto of the Hare Krishna movement, back to home, back to God. And maybe some people need a remedial English class or something. But so it's back to home, back to Godhead. So, any questions on these points? Antaryami Balaram, that's a really good name.
Thank you, Maharaj. So, Maharaj, just wanted to ask, if we knew both the options, that we have Krishna on our side or on one side and this miserable material world on the other side. So if when we are knowing that these are the two options, then still knowing that this place is miserable and still we are choosing this miserable place, is a little bit surprising, Maharaj.
Yes, it is surprising. Krishna himself is surprised. It's because people would rather be independent in this world and poor. I mean, ultimately, for example, the poor countries of the world could just surrender to the rich countries and just be assimilated, but they would rather have their independence and be poor and miserable. So the underlying assumption, when you give an argument, often when people give arguments, there is an unstated underlying premise. And the argument's really based on that unstated underlying premise. So if you bring it to the surface, you can show. So the underlying unstated premise in that argument is that no one acts against their rational self-interest. But my God, I mean, that's not true. In fact, if you just read the news, it's very rare you find someone acting in their self-interest. People, and because if one wants to enjoy without Krishna, then they'd rather go into business for themselves. And it's not that, when you leave, say if you leave Krishna, like your first birth is as a hog or something like that. You might start out as a demigod. You may just be a curiosity seeker. Maybe you just think it's, just tourism. Just see, take a tour of the material world. I mean, you can see people from rich countries, sometimes they go for tourism to poor countries. They want to see how people live there. And so, but we become entangled. But Krishna says, Ded Gatwana Nivartante. He puts you through a routine. Once you actually go back to Godhead, you won't come back here because Krishna really does a job on you. I mean, anyone that's seriously practicing bhakti yoga knows when I finally get out of here, I'm not coming back. I can't go through this again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Hare
Wonderful.
Krishna. So, any other question? Well, thank you very much. Bimla, thank you.
Yes, Maharaj. I'm just thinking whether if you can elaborate a little bit on the concept of back to Godhead, because that's a concept generally everybody presupposes that, we are all going back to Golok Vrindavan. We are in ISKCON, like rubber stamped it on our heads. You see tilak, so that's our ticket, like we're going back to Godhead. And then you ask
No,
that
yeah, as they
phenomenal question, what is your rasa? And then you are like, duh.
well, what is their rasa? People that ask that question, I think, are
Mhm.
really jumping the gun, as they say. I mean, for one thing, they need to pay a lot more attention to the behavior of great acharyas. Prabhupada, Bhakti Siddhanta, they were very discreet. They seem to have the philosophy, if you've got it, flaunt it. But that's obviously not, the acharyas were very discreet. People that are, sort of obsessed with rasa generally don't have one yet. And people that have one don't talk about it so much.
Yes, Maharaj. So, Mark, if you could elaborate upon the difference between, like, when we talk about back to Godhead, in one sense, like the Yuga Dharma and
Yes.
the promises says, and like the more specific idea of like Golok Vrindavan. So, is there any difference, or it's just like free for all? Anybody can, like, whoever can get into whichever compartment. That's it. The train is going.
No. It's actually in the spiritual world, they actually know how to manage. So it's no, the spiritual world is a world only for pure souls. And people, it's like, people, some devotees have fear, oh my God, what if I'm like a squirrel for all eternity or something? Or what if I'm like a banana tree or something, for trillions of years? But actually, the spiritual world is Vaikuntha precisely because everyone's desire is fulfilled. All the trees are desire trees. It's not like, okay, you wanted to be a cowherd boy, but we need another banana tree over in the field number 107 there. It's not like that. There's no bureaucracy. It's just it's a place where, because if you have a pure desire, why wouldn't Krishna fulfill it?
Yes. Thank you so much, Maharaj. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So,
So,
Anand,
on the other hand there, Amala Charandas and Ananda Leela. Okay, ladies first. Ananda Leela, Devi Dasi.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. This
By the way, where are you all?
I'm in Mayapur. I think the others are some other part. I'm in Delhi and Pakistan and a few other places.
Oh my.
So yeah, thank you for the wonderful session and eye opener. my question is this pure desire which you're talking about and Krishna will fulfill. So that applies here also while we are in the material world, in this world, when we are performing, when we are living, performing a service, or that just
If
is
it's a pure desire, but sometimes in this world our desires are a little mixed. I mean, there's definitely a service desire, but we may have other components. So as the saying goes, Krishna, if you are dear to Krishna, he will not give you enough rope to hang yourself. You know, they say if you give a fool enough rope, he'll hang himself. And
Yeah.
so it's just like the parents. I mean, a good mother, a good father, the child says, I think I'll just have candy for dinner. You know, mother says, oh, I love my child so much. No, that's not a good mother. It's a fool. And so Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Pitaham, I am the father, Asya Jagato, of this world, Mata, and the mother. Pitaham Asya Jagato, Mata, Dhata, Pitamaha. It's funny, in English you say grandfather, in Sanskrit you say father grand. Pitamaha. It's actually true. So, yeah, so Krishna is just a perfect parent. So if you're a mother, you know, when do you give your child what the child wants? When do you say no? If you're a good parent, you know, when to say yes and when to say no. And Krishna is a perfect parent.
Yeah. Thank you, Maharaj.
So finally, Amal Charandas, where are you?
Maharaj, Hare Krishna, Delhi Maharaj,
Where are you?
from Delhi.
Oh, Delhi.
Yeah.
How do you breathe?
Difficult Maharaj. AQI is around 500, 400 nowadays, so it's very troublesome nowadays.
So, you have a question?
Yes, Maharaj. So, Maharaj, thanks a ton for the session, and it was very amazing how you related Bhagavad Gita 5.13 is related with this story of Puranjana. So it was very fascinating for me. But what I feel sometimes is like when we read all these stories of Puranjana and all these stories which are like some sort of things like are there which is mentioned, like some lusty things, some sexual things are there. So we feel like most of the things are there which we don't know, and we feel like searching it out how things happen or how things takes place. So sometimes our mind gets contaminated by hearing all those stories. So, and I find like in Bhagavatam there are so many stories, like in case of Ajamila, in case of Puranjana. So when we hear those stories or when we read those stories, then some sort of things comes up in mind ki how things are taking place and why Shukdev Goswami is mentioning about so much about sexual things and all.
Well,
So,
because it's the biggest problem.
but discussing same thing again and again.
Not really. I mean, you're kind of picking out all these things, putting them together in one place. But if, for example, the first canto is very, very little about that. Second canto, very little about it. So if you look at the whole Bhagavatam, no, it's not just talking about those things. It's occasionally it talks about those things, but most of the Bhagavatam, a very strong majority of the verses are about other things.
And sometimes,
And if for a particular devotee, if reading some particular portion, as Prabhupada said, if it if it's not, you don't feel it's healthy, then just read something else. But for most people, I mean, lust is kind of makes the world go round. I mean, we know that the most, the single biggest internet market is pornography. So the Bhagavatam mentions it because, I mean, you may be extremely fortunate in the sense that you're not absorbed in these things, and that means that that's a great blessing. That means in past lives you kind of work through all this stuff. But for most people on the planet, it's a big problem. Attachment, even in marriage, it's a problem. So the Bhagavatam is real world teachings. It's not sort of dancing around. It's getting right to the point of what's really going on in this world.
When you are in Grihastha ashram, sometimes like when you're reading all these stories and it's mentioned like female is a jackal and skin disease and all those things, karkasa and all those words when come around, it makes it hard-hearted and all. So
Yeah.
how to deal with
Yeah,
those situations?
it's actually those things like, this one's a jackal. If you look at those stories, it's not the Bhagavatam saying it, it's some frustrated guy saying it. A lot of the times it's just someone saying it because they've become very frustrated. But the Bhagavatam gives so many stories of great ladies. There are so many stories where wives are more intelligent than their husbands. For example, the wives of Kaliya, or the wives of the Dvija Patnigan, the wives of the Brahmins that didn't want to give food for Krishna. So there are many, many stories where the women are more intelligent. And if you look at when the women are speaking about Krishna, like when Krishna came to Indraprastha or when he came back to Dwarka, often in the Bhagavatam, when Krishna is coming, the most intelligent prayers, the most philosophical prayers are spoken by women. So the Bhagavatam, maybe some verses where someone sort of lets off steam, women are this or that, but the point is that women are often portrayed in the Bhagavatam as being extremely intelligent. And there are many stories where the women are directly more intelligent, like the wives of the Brahmins, where every imaginable male authority figure got it wrong. So these the Dvija Patni Gan, the wives of the Brahmins, their husband said don't go, their grown son said don't go, their fathers, their brothers. It's like, okay, let's bring in all the male authority figures so they can all get it wrong at one place in one time. There's another interesting thing, what real Vedic culture was. For example, there's this one scene in the Mahabharata, in the main text of the Mahabharata, where Pandu's wives have already called 5 demigods, and he's gotten 5 sons, and he just wants more, because for kings, sons were like the supreme collectible. They wanted lots of sons because the life expectancy for warriors was not always very high, and they wanted to keep their dynasties going. So Pandu said to Kunti, call more devas. And she said, seriously? She said, what does everybody think about me? So it's interesting because then Pandu quotes this verse to her where he says, a woman has to follow her husband whether he's right or wrong. And then Kunti basically replies, in your dreams. In other words, like not going to happen. And then she gives an argument, and then, as I say, the man gets the last word. Yes, dear. So it's very interesting because he actually quotes this proverb, and then she just says, no way, it's wrong. And then he just says, okay. And they do this after he said that a woman has to. So in other words, if you look at actual marriages in the Shastra, what I see is they're real people. They're not Muslims. They're actually real people. And as we know, marriages don't really work if one party or the other just tries to boss the other one around. It just doesn't really work. And the reason marriages were so successful in this culture is because they had common sense, and the man and woman knew how to respect each other. Because if you don't have that, then it doesn't work. So let's see, Rasala, or however you.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. Maharaj, I've seen in the Bhagavatam, the majority of the prayers that devotees praying to Krishna or Supreme Lord, in many of the prayers, they're praying to Krishna as a creative master. So rather than directly praising Krishna or Lord, glorifying him directly, they praise him like he's a master of modes of material nature, creative energy. So why is it that Maharaj, instead of directly praying to Krishna or praising him, so there is a praise for the creative energy of the Lord?
Because the sages knew that most of the people who are going to read the Bhagavatam in the future are not pure devotees. And they still have some attachment to the material world, and therefore it's important to remind them that the material world belongs to Krishna. It's, it's not yours. You can't exploit it. It belongs to somebody. So, understanding that this whole universe belongs to Krishna and is meant for his pleasure, it's the foundation of civilization. Otherwise, you just get everyone, a bunch of greedy people trying to get whatever they want for themselves, and eventually the civilization collapses. So people really need to understand that this world doesn't belong to them. It belongs to Krishna. And our bodies, which of course come out of this physical world, also belong to Krishna. Oh, it's getting a little late here. You guys are in the morning, right? It's morning there. That's unfair.
Yes, Maharaj, it's early morning. It's just
Yeah.
late.
So I guess we'll end here. Yes.
Just the last one, Maharaj. Just the last one. Thank you, Maharaj. Maharaj, that the question of Amal Charan Prabhu actually spurred me, and I'm asking a question because I find you, the most competent to answer that question and satisfy me actually. We read Bhagavatam and even the other Goswami literature. It's like Rupa Goswami, sometimes where and we see personality of Rupa Goswami describing Radharani. Or even in Bhagavatam, we see many of these personalities when they are describing the female personalities, the opposite gender, in a way to praise, as a way of either praising or kind of, as we see, wooing over them, take them off by their feet, off the feet. And there they use certain words which are very direct, about their body parts, like how your body parts are beautiful or something attractive like that.
Oh yeah. The Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is not squeamish. Yeah, the Bhagavatam is not squeamish about body parts.
Exactly. So then my question is, because you were talking about Bhagavatam, or I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, but first the first thing you need to understand is that the areas of the human body which are considered sexual are culturally defined, and it moves over time. Now, the reproductive area of the body generally is supposed to be covered, but for example, even if you look at Europe a few centuries ago, a woman's neck, yes, her neck, was considered more sexual than her chest, and therefore you can see paintings of queens and noble ladies where they have this plunging neckline, but their neck is covered. And or sometimes the ankles were considered sexual. And if you go to different parts of the world, so it's kind of it's not intrinsically so, it's just sort of culturally defined. And also there's a lot of evidence that before the British came, the British and maybe, to some extent the Muslims, that, women in India, especially South India, where it's kind of hot all the time, they were, they were topless. And you see this in temple architecture. I mean, you see, the
Hmm.
if you look at South Indian temples, they have engravings. And so is that part of the body erotic or is it just maternal? And so, yeah, we can't bring all of our assumptions. It was a very different world. It was I mean, they have Shiva Linga, the Linga and Joni. From the Western point of view, that's like unbelievable that anyone could imagine that the male and female reproductive organs are somehow something for religious worship. I mean, in the West, people just, it's inconceivable. But somehow in India, people embrace that. And we don't find, I think, if you study Indian history, a few exceptions like sort of the crazy Tantra people. But in general, India was not a promiscuous country. Historically, India was not a promiscuous country. And yet it's a very warm, especially South India, a very warm tropical country, and even other parts where in countries like that, in climates where like that, there's a tendency where, because people just, too miserable to cover their body all the time. And therefore, it's just the parts of the body that are not covered are not seen as sexual or erotic. And so we should not commit the very common mistake of thinking that whatever our culture is today is somehow objective, universal, the right way to do things. And so therefore, why did people many centuries ago in India, how come they didn't get it? Why couldn't they figure this out? Well, because our views are just our views.
So this is a very relative thing, actually, in a way.
Yeah, like I said, the reproductive area of the body tends to be sort of universal, that, it should be covered. But even then, you have the Naga Babas. I mean,
Mm.
maybe because I'm coming from the West, to me, it's like, ew. It's just, I mean, believe me, the last thing I'd want to see is a Naga Baba. And so, yeah, people just have different cultures. And so I think you have to look not just as, okay, do they think this part of the body is sexual or not? I think what you have to look at is what kind of behavior does the civilization? Is it a society where basically people get married and they're able to be faithful in marriage, and therefore there's not a lot of promiscuity?
Mm.
So if you see a culture that's reasonably chaste or reasonably self-controlled, and at the same time they expose different parts of their body, well, maybe those parts of the body are not intrinsically erotic.
Mm. Thank you very much, Maharaj. It's a wonderful insight. Thank you, Maharaj. That's
Thank you.
important.
So, okay, so I'm going to have to go now. It's getting past my bedtime. It's a real pleasure. I really enjoy spending some time with all of you. And thank you, Bimla, for organizing everything.
Please, Maharaj, we all of us, we are requesting you, Maharaj, to give more of your association. We will try to trouble you more. Maybe like after God Purnima or something like that. Please, Maharaj, at least once in a while you can come and enlighten us, Maharaj. I understand you have got busy schedule. Like still, Maharaj, we insist.
Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. All glories to His Holiness Hridayananda Goswami Maharaj. Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Jai.
Hare. Oh, send me a copy of the recording.
Yes, Maharaj, we do. We will.
Hare Krishna.